Well, tonight again, 1 Samuel. This is the 12th. I wish I would have been able to maneuver this better because we're just one off from the chapter that we're in chapter 11, but this is number 12. But if you remember again, and that's why I'm emphasizing the second section here that we're dealing with Saul in 1 Samuel. And that's going from chapter 9 to chapter 15. By the time we get to chapter 16, we'll start looking at David. In this one, we're going to be looking at what I will call Saul's reign confirmed. Now, like I said, it covers 1 Samuel chapter 11, verses 1 through 15. And a lot of people will call this the actual coronation. I called last week the coronation. Just like the week before, you had the anointing. Well, that was it too. You had the anointing differently. Then you had the first coronation, and then this is the confirmation. It's kind of like they had to learn, just like Saul did, about what a king is, what a king does, and how things work. And we'll see a little bit more next week. We ended the last chapter with Saul returning home after he was coronated. Most people will say, in studying this out, that only 1 month has passed when this particular event comes into play. Chapter 12 will also show you that there was something already stirring, there was something already brewing with the Ammonites against the folks in Jabesh Gilead. So there was something already going on, but we're not going to deal with that just yet. Saul has been anointed, he's been publicly chosen, and he's been announced as the king of Israel, which, if you remember, she wanted to have a king set over them. But there's no real government set up, there's no structure of an army, except for those men who God's stirred the heart of to go with Saul. There's no formality of any sort, no taxes raised, no palaces there, none whatsoever. And if you remember too, the very last verse, which will come into play in this chapter, that last verse ended in the last chapter mentioning about the children of Belial, who both verbally and publicly expressed their disrespect, their contempt, and their rejection of Saul as their king. Now, we're going to look at first, of course, Nahash the Ammonite. The Ammonites, that's their king, and so he's going to lead them to come up against Jabesh Gilead, and in fact they did. They laid siege against the city. This is part of the tribe of Manasseh, which had laid claim and settled in the land on the other side of Jordan. So that's closest to the Ammonites. Also, the Ammonites had been basically wiped out, and all of their land was taken from them. And so probably over the years, they want to get back. So what do we have? Then Nahash the Ammonite came up and encamped against Jabesh Gilead, and all the men of Jabesh said unto Nahash, "Make a covenant with us, and we will serve thee." That's an odd thing to say. They decided, I guess, that their numbers and their position were just too weak to fight the enemy. They offered no resistance, but they sought some sort of compromise by offering to pay taxes and or become a tribute to the Ammonites. What happened to prayer? What happened to appealing to God? Now, look at verse 2. And Nahash the Ammonite answered them, "On this condition will I make a covenant with you, that I may thrust out all your right eyes and lay it for a reproach upon all Israel." Well, basically they're saying, yeah, we'll agree if you will disable yourselves permanently, and in particularly disable yourself as far as men of war would ever be. Benjamites, I think, wasn't it them who had the sling and were accurate? that them that had that, and they were, a lot of them left-handed, maybe they used their right, I don't know what it was, but it really disabled them a great deal. That would be a reproach to all of Israel. Those men would never be able to, again, fight if they agreed to this. So in verse 3, we then see a period of grace. The elders of this city offered an option. I wonder, were they thinking of Saul? I don't know. It says, and the elders of Jabesh said unto him, give us 7 days respite, that we may send messengers unto all the coast of Israel. And then, if there be no man to save us, we will come out to thee. Well, the word respite in our own language comes actually from the French word, and it means a postponement. It actually means a grace period or an extension of time for deliberation. The King James translators were very accurate when they used that word because of the Hebrew word and what was meant there. They were basically asking for a 7-day reprieve of the siege, and they intended for the hostilities to stop. I would imagine that the Ammonites were throwing darts, they were doing arrows, they were shooting, catapulting rocks, who knows what they were doing, and they were not about to let any of the messengers get out and send for any help. But they did give them that 7-day reprieve and allowed them to send messengers. I guess the Ammonites thought there's no way they're going to get anybody. Otherwise, I wouldn't have thought they would have let the messengers get out, or if once they got out, they would have killed them. But they gave them the time. Nahash, I believe, made the wrong calculations. He didn't count on God getting involved. He didn't know anything about it. Well, and then we get to the sad news in verse 4. For whatever reason or reasons he had, here's what happened. The messengers got to Gibeah. Saul isn't home, but the people of Gibeah get the sad news. Verse 4, then came the messengers of Gibeah of Saul and told the tidings in the ears of the people, and all the people lifted up their voices and wept. There was compassion for their brethren. They had a need for others to come help them. Now, Gill also said that this is the first time that Gibeah is called Gibeah of Saul. So it's now a place of note because of Saul. And what we see in verse 5 is a humble king. And behold, Saul came after the herd out of the field. And Saul said, now this ought to tell you, Saul wasn't around when the news came. And so he wanted to know, what aileth the people that they weep? He didn't know yet. And they told him the tidings of the men of Jabesh. But I want you to notice what was happening. He isn't in a palace. He isn't even building a palace. Where is he? He's out in a field. He's either dealing with agriculture and herds, or just at least the herds, but he's doing quite a bit of work. I would imagine that he came in like you would from any field work, and you're exhausted. My family, I come from a family of farmers. And when you got done from the evening of out in the field, you were exhausted. That was it. So here's what came in. He came in from working in the fields and bringing in the stock, asked what was going on, and then what takes place? Verse 6, the Spirit of God. The Spirit of God came upon Saul when he heard those tidings. Now this again is where we're talking about how it is that God would come upon a king. Doesn't this sound a lot like God would come upon one of the judges that we can look back on? And in fact, this is something I think that you can really treasure and look at and ponder a little bit for meditation. Again, he'd been working in the fields or with the herds, and hard day's work, probably worn out, the Spirit came upon him, and his anger, he got riled up. He got stirred up. This really does compare a great deal to what happened to the judges. There we'll see the word slightly change where it says the Spirit of the Lord. But the Spirit of the Lord came upon who? Well, you can see it through all the judges, but in particular, you'll find men like Othniel, Gideon, and Samson. 3 times it says the Spirit of the Lord came upon Samson. All of these men, the Spirit of the Lord came upon them to act as a judge or as a deliverer. So the Spirit of God came upon Saul when he heard those tidings, and he started acting like a king. He got angry. There was something that he was acting like a king, a leader for his people. Somebody was attacking. He acted immediately and decisively. We see this. The message was heard. He took a yoke of oxen and hewed them in pieces and sent them throughout all the coast of Israel by the hands of messengers, saying, whosoever cometh not forth after Saul and after Samuel, so shall it be done unto his oxen. Well, that's a pretty strong statement. This is not an uncommon signal that was sent out. If you remember, there was one man that when he sent out a messenger, he actually took a concubine and cut her up and sent her out. That was pretty horrendous. But here what is he saying? He said, listen, you better come out, and notice what he does. He attaches his name to Samuel. Now, Gill states that that's because he was not yet accepted or there was no formal inauguration. I think it still has to do with the fact that Samuel has not yet told the people he has resigned, and Saul has not yet stepped forward like he's doing today, like he's doing in this incident. Remember, he'd already been anointed, he'd already been chosen, but he goes back home. He does his regular work. Now, this is the first time that someone has attacked one of the tribes of Israel and not his tribe. But he's willing to step up because the Spirit of the Lord has moved upon him. And so all of these things began to take place that will really confirm Saul as the king. What does he do? He numbers all of those who were going to fight or being able to fight because of the response and the fact that it was a great one. He numbered them. He numbered them in Bezek. This is where, again, there were also other fightings, numberings taking place, and the children of Israel were 300,000, and the men of Judah 30,000. Now, it's interesting to be able to look at and wonder why the men of Judah were separated from the rest. Well, if you remember and think about it, the tribe of Judah was the tribe chosen back in the book of Genesis to carry the scepter. They were the chosen tribe to be the one that the Messiah and the king would come out of. But what are they showing? This tribe was not jealous. This tribe was not bothered by the fact that the king right now was Saul out of the tribe of Benjamin, and they were sending their support. They came in answer to the call. They came and they submitted themselves to the rule of King Saul. Then we see the messengers' glad news. And they said unto the messengers that came, thus shall ye say unto the men of Jabesh Gilead. So what we've got is they're going to send out messengers. They're going to be running ahead. There were a lot of times when this is how they would do it. They would send runners on ahead of the army. And these runners would go at a good distance, long distance, and they would get the information there. And here's what they did. They sent the message, tomorrow By that time the sun be hot. In other words, high noon. I guess that's when it is. It's what it sounds like. Ye shall have help. And the messengers came and showed it to the men of Jabesh, and they were glad. What joy and rejoicing this must have been. No wonder they were glad. This news really cheered their hearts. Help is on the way. Isn't that what they were asking about? Isn't that what they were concerned with? Is there going to be a man to step up to save us? Yeah, God's got one. He does. You'll read in the next verse how that help was knocking on their door by noon, having already destroyed the enemy. So here's the response to Nahash. Therefore the men of Jabesh said, tomorrow, they come out to Nahash, and they said, tomorrow we'll come out to you, and you shall do with us all that seem good unto you. In other words, we're going to come out tomorrow, and you can put our eye out. They know that's not going to happen, but that's primarily what they're saying. They must have made it sound pretty good because they didn't attack, and they're sitting there waiting. Our search, maybe they said our search for a deliverer was unsuccessful. That's what it sounds like they said. So, you know what? We'll come out and you do with this what you want to. That's the message. But that's not what really happened. In verse 11, we see it, the decisive battle, the battle plan. Saul has again remind you that the Spirit of God came upon him to do the very work for which he was anointed. And it was so on the morrow that Saul put the people in 3 companies, a divine plan. And they came into the midst of the host in the morning watch, and slew the Ammonites until the heat of the day. And it came to pass that they which remained were scattered, so that 2 of them were not left together. In other words, there's not one of the Ammonites' army man could be with another one. They were all isolated. Every single military man was isolated and alone. The battle was so successful that one could not stand with another. The enemy was decimated and destroyed, and by noon they were knocking on the doors of the city of Jabesh Gilead, and they were saying, hey, here we are. Help has arrived. Then something happens. There is a desire for their desire to be unanimous for King Saul. They want everyone to be totally united behind Saul and to remember what happened. And they did. They remembered what happened at the coronation. And if you remember, that's why I said it'll come up in verse 12, where it says, and the people said unto Samuel, who is he that said, shall Saul reign over us? We remember that. Bring those men out that we may put them to death. They would not tolerate such behavior. There's no way. But again, you see the humility, the compassion of King Saul. Saul, I think, was one of those men that was fully aware at this time of God's grace and mercy that was upon him, and it extended to those the same way that did not deserve it. He didn't deserve to be king. He didn't deserve to have the Spirit of God come upon him and empower him and give him the idea and the plan. You can imagine that really here's the Ammonites, and they're facing on the city of Jabesh Gilead. No doubt they had surrounded the city, but their attack is at one side of it. And we've got Saul, it says 3 sides, one on either side and one from the back. And those 3 came in, a 3-pronged attack, and decimated them. Then we find the end of Samuel's ministry as judge to be instituted by his own actions of confirming Saul to be king. Saul's call of confirmation. Then said Samuel to the people. Now, did you hear of Samuel being anywhere around this, up to this point? You didn't read anywhere. But he was. I think that's even when you go back that Saul said, Saul and Samuel. He wasn't just saying, you need to listen to me because I got Samuel on my side. He was talking that him and Samuel were on the same page. And they were calling for the same thing. So then Samuel said to the people, come and let us go to Gilgal and renew the kingdom there. This was a ceremony, one like they did not have at the very first. Saul was anointed by Samuel, already mentioned, without anybody being there at all. In fact, if you remember, Saul and Samuel and Saul's servant were walking together, leaving the city, and Samuel stopped and said, send your servant on ahead. Not a soul was present when Samuel anointed Saul to be king. But then the leaders came and chose Saul to be king. And they saw him, he was every bit what they wanted. Head and shoulders taller than everybody. He looked like the royal monarch that they had envisioned all along. But now again, he calls them to Gilgal. And what happens? There's a great and glad celebration. And all the people went to Gilgal. And there they made Saul king. This is why I said Saul's reign confirmed. They made it unanimous. There were no other wicked men of Belial that spoke up this time. They knew they were under threat of death to do such a wicked thing. But even then, Saul would not allow any of that. Saul was made king before the Lord in Gilgal. But notice this, and there they sacrificed sacrifices of peace offerings before the Lord. And there Saul and all the men of Israel rejoiced greatly. Basically, this was a solemn ceremony almost. It was a ceremony of celebration. The enemy has been destroyed and the people have been liberated. They gave praise and thanksgiving and credit to the Lord for their win. They didn't take credit. They didn't give it to Saul. They gave it to the Lord. The proof was plain to see, though, that the Spirit of God was upon Saul. This seemed that God had not only anointed him, but empowered him and given him a wisdom to be the king that they desired. Peace offerings, we know, are followed by feasts. So they were rejoicing, they were eating. Whereas the last time the leaders spoke, they did so, and then they all just went home. This was a time to rejoice. In the next chapter, God promises something that shows his grace and mercy towards a rebellious people. He will show us the same. If we will obey, he will bless us. If we will but fear the Lord and serve him with our whole heart, God will bless us. We may have made wrong choices individually, corporately, or as a family, but I'm telling you, even when we make those choices, I can't wait to get to the next chapter and show you that he says, though you rejected me. I think I have that verse. Maybe not. Nope, I don't. I'll show it to you next week. I thought maybe I had it on there, but I think I took it out because I didn't want to. If we will but fear and obey and serve him with our whole heart, God will bless. What is happening in our midst right now in our church is an opportunity. We hurt and we sorrow over our loss, but God is still on the throne. We need to send a message to our King and tell him our troubles. We need messengers. We need prayer warriors asking that our King will come and deliver us from all of our difficulties. We need help, for we are without strength. We are without number. We are without ability. We need soldiers to step up. We need King Jesus to give us a plan and then execute that plan. We need to join together tonight and pray for help. And may God bless us and grant us our petitions before his